Any questions still for this group of speakers or for individual ones there? I'm still going to go up there a little bit and then throw it at you from the side, I think. I should have really practiced this before. I'm going to do it like this. Yeah, up. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. So I want to do 2 questions for the first speaker of this section. One was that, do you think that this auto-heteroanthropological method you used to study the world of Skyrim can be made in game design, a designed gameplay to be used in some kind of historical game to make the player study the actual setting of the world using your own experience with the game? It's something that could be fun to do in as an actual gameplay part of a game.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is that you have to keep in mind you will have to accept some trade-offs. It's the anthropological approach in Skyrim works very well because it's a fantasy game where we don't have any set expectations of how people behave. So we're kind of willing to buy a lot of things that would seem to us very off-putting and unrealistic in real games. In real world settings. And in fact, you can get some sense of this in Kingdom Come if you've played that, where you go into this peasant's hovel and the peasant says, "Get out before I call the guards." What? That's not going to happen, right? And of course, the other thing that you would not expect in reality is, you go into a peasant's hovel and then you get their whole life story out of them. They probably have better things to do. But as long as we accept this kind of convention for the game, that yes, people are going to do things that we wouldn't normally expect, that they're going to be willing to tell their stories. And I mean, it's all part and parcel of the RPG conventions in the first place. You approach any non-player character in an RPG and all of a sudden they're telling you the sob story about how they lost their ring in a cave taken by a bear and how they would really love it if you could get that for them, right? So it's I think the anthropological approach where the game is designed to kind of encourage this investigation of characters. I think that's very much what RPGs are about, and particularly open world RPGs. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. If I can do another question, so not you, but about maps. Using, wanted to ask, have you during your studies, have you studied particular cases of historical maps that can convey some kind of historical information about the period they were made in historical games that maybe you found using this kind of maps?
So let me just think about the question. So that the game maps that they've created specifically reference sort of actual historical sources?
If you have found some game where historical maps have been used to...
yeah. One that I can think of just off the top of my head because I did a presentation about it. And when we say historical, this is a map from sort of the 1920s, I believe, so not that old. But as an example, there's a video game called The Town of Light, which is set in an Italian asylum in Volterra in Italy. And what they've done, they've actually taken certain archive objects and actually put them into the game. So for example, they've got maps that presumably would have been in the asylum to show what, a patient or a visitor how to get around. They put that into the game, so they must have scanned them in, got permission to do that. And I kind of argued that they were doing that to kind of add authenticity to the game. They were referencing real sources, but also they had maps of the general area in which the asylum was in, showing sort of nearby features and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that definitely does happen, and I'm sure there must be lots of other examples. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add a little bit to that, I think the issue with maps in games that we're still grappling with, and only some very experimental games try to break beyond this, is that players expect their maps to be accurate. If you look at any map from the medieval period, especially, those maps are accurate in their own right, but they're not accurate in terms of representing space. They weren't really meant to represent space exactly. Particularly the portlands, the maps used to navigate, they were not meant to represent space. They're meant to show you how to best get from place A to place B to place C and so on. And we don't like that in games. You look at the map in Skyrim, and how do they get their cartography so exactly right? I guess they can use magic, but that excuse doesn't always work, right? Okay.
Could
Yes,
you
thank you.
could you pass the cube on the way all the way over there? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I really enjoy all the presentations. I have a question for ethnographic Jacob. Yes, I was interested whether you were dealing with your own emotions as part of your research, like emotional involvement when you're playing the game, when I don't know, where you're relating with some particular narratives within Skyrim.
Emotions didn't come up that much simply because I had already played through this game, and so I didn't have any kind of surprises or anything like that. Where emotions did come up was particularly because I had played through the whole game, but this was the first time I was playing the special edition. And in my notes, time and again, what comes up is I've forgotten how beautiful this game is. It's really amazing. It looks beautiful. And of course, the special edition enhances quite a lot of things in terms of the visual appearance. Doesn't enhance anything else, unfortunately. But yeah, the kind of, I think most of the time that was about as emotional as I got was in terms of looking at how impressed I am with the visuals. Does that answer your question?
I was thinking more about the narratives. I mean, one of the criticisms that I have read about Skyrim is that people do the quest, but actually they don't feel involved in what they're doing. Like the outcome actually that doesn't matter much.
Well, in that aspect, I don't think I noted very much about it. But certainly one of the big challenges I had playing Skyrim was that I couldn't decide which side to take in the Civil War because both sides seem to have a point and both sides seem to have some very disgusting things about them as well. It was like, I don't know what to do about this, so I stayed neutral in the end. But certainly I tried to analyze how the game is trying to draw me into a particular narrative. But of course, the first 10, 20 hours of the game are fairly one-sided, in particular because apart from the starting incident where, you kind of should have a grudge against the Empire because they just tried to kill you. But then you're faced with the choice of whether you will follow the Imperial soldier or the other guy. And this person will then help you out as you go on through the first town of the game, and you are thus corralled into hearing his side of the story, his side of the story. So you actually don't get a very kind of again, it's all about subjectivity in Skyrim, right? So yeah.
Could you pass on the cube? Yes, there we go.
My question was prompted by Dennis's presentation, but it's actually an open question to the forum. So I had a bit of a dissonance creeping out in my mind the more I heard this particular panel. And if I could put it into words, coherent words, is that games represent a creationist version of history, right? This is the God putting aged dinosaur bones into the ground to be found by archaeologists later. There is a crafted history and crafted archaeology and crafted geology and morphology in place by the game designer. So shouldn't we be a bit more careful, especially when applying hermeneutic methods to the game world and the game text, and as in drawing conclusions from it as scholars, as historians, as educators, or is it something just bothers me?
wants to start?
Who wants to start with this one?
Okay. Well, I will answer with the best possible scholarly answer. It depends.
Isn't it a bit
I mean,
reductive?
it depends what conclusions we're trying to draw from this stuff. If we're trying to draw conclusions about the game world itself, about the story of the game world and so on, then probably the best we can get is actually what the developers put in there. On the other hand, if this is a representation of a real fragment of history, then you have to grapple with what Ian Bogost calls procedural rhetoric, which is the idea that the game rules themselves are also a form of rhetoric. It's a form of presenting an argument. I mean, particularly in survival games, the idea is kind of that the richer you are, the happier you are in life, because otherwise you're dead, right? So you have to keep that in mind as well, obviously, that if you're playing a game set in a historical setting, who were its creators? What did they think? What is their idea of what a good life is, and so on? All these things will probably filter through in some way, and so the world that they present will be filtered through their views in some way. I mean, nobody ever succeeds in making an objective representation of history, right? So, game designers especially, particularly when we choose to do things that are fun.
And one thing that I would maybe add is that if I sort of get your question right, it basically means should we not take into account the created nature of these worlds, right?
Well, more to the point that unlike real history and unlike real world, that there is a definitive answer to some extent, even if it's hidden.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you could take that into account. I mean, but that to me sounds a bit like the author has the final word, and especially in fan culture, this is not necessarily true. It can be. There's plenty of fans who don't believe that the author is dead, but there's also plenty of fans who do. So it's like there's a split there as well. People have opinions and they differ.
I mean, it's the main thing is how much immersed can you become, because for example in first-person survival games all you do for the first hour or so is bashing wood with an axe. This doesn't mean really that you will eventually go out starting bashing trees with an axe. I mean, at some point as a player you can define between what's real and what is not, I guess. To some extent, most people, it's not always, of course, so clear-cut of a truth, at least. This is my opinion, at least.
I think this is a really interesting question. I've thought about this a lot in terms of archaeology, because obviously, normally in terms of the archaeological record, we can't go and ask someone, well, why did you put that there? However, I think that you can't look at the game space in isolation anyway. You need to look at kind of, there's this theory, I think, by T.L. Taylor called the assemblage of play, where you need to look at not just the game space, but how the player's interacting with the hardware, kind of the whole thing. So if you look at it in that sense, there's still something to study, definitely. And, even if the developers have, they will put things there for a certain reason. They may have mapped it in the beginning, so you may question why would you even map it, for example. But players interact with things in different ways and in lots of different kind of contexts. So I think that still needs to be taken into account. And also I think it's kind of, I don't know whether dangerous is the right word, but I think I'm kind of concerned about this idea that, especially in terms of archaeo gaming, that it's only things that have sort of been lost or that are kind of like unstable in terms of like the digital record that are worth recording, because it's like then, we can't understand kind of the original, sorry, I'm kind of going on train of thought, but the idea that it's only when something is kind of destroyed that it's more meaningful.
Just a quick final note on that question. because it came up when you were talking about the fans. With the death of the author, we have to keep in mind also that while most fans prefer there to be an author, with the Elder Scrolls in particular, and also with Lost Souls and various other games now taking this approach, the author himself or herself abdicates. With the Elder Scrolls, they intentionally don't give you all the answers. They give you multiple answers to the same question, and they give you different objects in the game that all could lead to different conclusions. And this is absolutely intentional. They're trying to create a world in which they don't know the answer.
All right, with that very final and quick note, I'm going to usher everybody to the coffee tables. Thank you so very much. I think you've shown wonderfully what a multi-sided scholarly discipline and playful discipline this is. Thank you very much. Cheers. We'll be back at 4.